So welcome again, and glad you're here. Please feel free to continue to fill up the chat. I am at this time turning it over to my colleague, Ashley Harris.
Good morning, everyone. We're so happy to see you all today. Thank you again for continuing to fill up the chat. I have the pleasure of doing a land acknowledgement this morning. So at this time, I want to take a moment to reflect on the lands on which we reside. We are coming from many places, and we want to acknowledge the ancestral homelands and traditional territories of Indigenous peoples, the original caretakers of the land. We recognize we must continue to build our solidarity with Native peoples. As the quote on the slide says, there have always been Indigenous people in the space we call home, and there always will be. I am located in Houston, Texas, and I reside in the lands of the Coahutecan, the Karankawa, and the Sana people. We also acknowledge that our country would not exist if it wasn't for the free enslaved labor of Black people. We honor the legacy of the African diaspora and Black life, knowledge and skills stolen due to the violence and white supremacy. Please join me in a collective breath to honor Black and Indigenous ancestors who have paved the way for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. So as we come together today, you can see our three main purposes. The first is to explore and reflect upon the US Prep's DEI journey, to engage with a variety of resources to consider ways in which using a DEI lens can help actualize our organization's equity statements. And of course, we always bring ourselves together to collaborate with others. We want to share experiences and resources as we consider how we might apply today's webinar learning to our specific contexts and our organizational goals. If you were able to join some of our prior webinars, this equity equation might look familiar to you. When we engage in our equity work, we consider the who, the what, and the how as we take the next step along our journey towards equity. So for today's session, our who is you all. It's our US Prep Coalition. It's also your individual organizations. And then it's also you as an individual, recognizing that our work towards equity through DEI allows us to move forward both as organizations and teams and also as individuals. The what we'll be focusing on again is actualizing our equity statements, and how we'll be doing this is by exploring resources to support developing our DEI lens. If you'll take a quick minute on this next slide to read our agenda. You'll see that a good portion of our time today will be in small groups exploring resources. So to frame a little bit on the next slide, before we jump into the work and sharing our journey, we want to share with you that when we conceived of this webinar months ago, we fully intended to come to you all with a nice, neat, clean DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion lens resource, a tool that we could apply to all aspects of our work. But as we set about on this journey to design this resource or to create this resource, we learned that as a US Prep team, we needed to engage in a much deeper process to bring about the level of impact that we wanted to have with our DEI call to action. In our journey to develop this DEI Lens product, the tool that we really pictured using, not only at this webinar, but also in our daily work, we came to realize that the process of personal and organizational growth was just as important as the product itself. And in this way, the process is also the product. So we come to you today acknowledging that we do not have all the answers, but rather we come with a commitment to knowing better and doing better. And we want to share our journey with you all and model the vulnerability that we believe is necessary to fully transform the way we do our work. So we will take you on this journey that US Prep has gone on as we work to develop our DEI lens. We recognize that the journey is complex. Again, it's a team journey, an organizational journey, and also an individual journey. And as we share this process that the US Prep team has gone through, we want to focus on how we can apply our learning to resources that help actualize our equity statement. And we invite you to reflect on the journey that you and your organizations are going on as well as you develop your equity lens. So let's pause here. And if you'll grab a piece of paper or open up a window on your device, we want to give you some individual journaling time to set your intention. So knowing that this is the focus of today's webinar, what do you hope to gain from today's webinar on applying a DEI lens to your work? So I will mute and I'll give everybody a couple of minutes to set your intention for today's session. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Deidre Collins.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Laura. As you view the slide before you, I'm sure your brain is already on sensory overload. So just pause for a moment and let me explain what you see before you. We wanted to visually represent our journey on this timeline. At the very top of the visual, there are 3 rectangular boxes that identify the stages of our journey. We first had to recognize and acknowledge that there was work for us to do individually and collectively. Once we were able to recognize and acknowledge our roles in this work, we needed to take action, which is the second step. And the third step, continuous learning, is where we stay as we continue to learn and embark upon this journey of disrupting inequities through our work as educators. So I'm going to spend just the next few minutes sharing a few specifics of our journey. As you are engaging, please know that there is not one right journey for everyone and every organization. These are the steps that we took and are continuing to take. We took some detours along the way, and as we continue to learn and grow, we will take a few more detours. That is part of the journey. During our first stage of recognizing and acknowledging, we had to take a step back and ask ourselves some very difficult questions. If we are supporting educator preparation programs with rethinking their programming and serving school districts and communities with students that have been systemically marginalized, how are we explicitly living diversity, equity, inclusion in our everyday work as a National Technical Assistance Center? We realized we were not hitting the mark and had to stop what we were doing and identify where we needed to improve and collectively identify what improvement would look and sound like. During the stage of recognizing acknowledgement, we knew we needed external support. We did not have the tools nor the expertise to do this work in isolation. We began to attend professional development sessions geared toward equitable practices. So then we leveraged the expertise of an external DEI coach to support our monthly DEI meetings. Through this process, we were able to develop a DEI statement. So I'm going to pause for a few seconds and give you some time to make meaning of what was shared during just our first stage of the work, recognize and acknowledge. Attending professional development sessions and developing a DEI statement was not enough. We knew we needed to take action. In order to responsibly take action, we needed to engage in more learning as individuals and also as a team. Again, we sought out experts in the field. In order for our team to engage and support critical conversations, our next step was for our entire team to gain the necessary tools by participating in the Courageous Conversations about Race training, which was facilitated by Glenn Singleton. Because our work is driven by high quality educational experiences, we attended Unbound Ed Standards Institute. We were able to walk away with a better understanding of the intersection of standards, instructional materials, and equitable practices. We continued our internal learning by engaging in research discussions on topics such as the opportunity myth, which was developed by TNTP. There was also a need for us to learn more, and we used time during our quarterly team retreats to participate in book studies, grounded in better understanding institutional racist practices and its root in the educational system. Through this process of beginning to take action, we realized that this would be an ongoing journey and that it was our collective responsibility to continuously learn, apply, and reevaluate our internal structures and processes. So again, I will pause, give you just a few seconds to make meaning of what was just shared in our second stage, take action. So the next stage is where we find ourselves today on our journey. We are in a state of continuous learning and reflection. Our team had to recommit to actualizing our DEI statement. We could not only speak it, but we had to live it and breathe it through all of our structures. The application of our learning has to live in our daily work. From establishing a diversity, equity, and inclusion project management team that plans our scope of work and learning through our objective and key results, our OKR document. We utilize the OKR document to drive the focus of our monthly DEI professional development sessions. We know the value of partnering with other expert organizations in the field and learn and will partner and continue to partner with them. We are becoming very intentional about grounding our coalition convenings, our retreats, our trainings, our webinars such as today, and also our coalition email blast in DEI. The onboarding process for our new team members is also a way for us to continuously be sure that we are creating time, space, and opportunities for new team members to engage in the learning early on and know our why for dismantling inequitable practices. And now we come to where we are today on our journey. This long journey and critical work has brought us to the fork in the road where we can stop, reflect, and codify our individual and organizational DEI lens. We could not have begun this process of codifying our DEI lens back during the recognize and acknowledge stage, nor during the take action stage. Now we can combine our collective understanding and learnings together to codify our organizational DEI lens. So you've heard our journey thus far, and you see there's still roads for us to travel along. So we're going to pause and give you an opportunity to quietly reflect. So on the next slide, you will see 4 guiding questions. Where are you in your journey? Where is your organization in the journey? As you have traveled along your path, what have you noticed along the way? And what are you wondering about as you are on your journey? So we're going to spend the next 4 minutes just giving you this quiet time of reflection. Feel free to jot down your thoughts along this journey. Feel free to also turn off your camera if you would like to quietly reflect and journal. And we will come back in 4 minutes. So we appreciate you taking the time to quietly reflect on your personal journey. I'll now pass it over to Dr. Linda Scott to share more about our next phase of the session.
So thank you all for reflecting with us on your journey. And at this point, we've really been asking ourselves questions around how do we define a DEI lens, and how might a codified DEI lens really support our institution in actualizing our equity statement and our equity goals? And really thinking about what resources we can explore to further our work and potentially develop our DEI lens. So we want to engage with you all today in really thinking about these 3 questions and in exploring some resources with us. So in the chat, we're going to share a link to some interactive slides that we're going to use in our small group time. And during the small group time, it's really an exploration designed to allow you all to really think about these 3 questions. How do we define a DEI lens? How might a codified DEI lens support your institution in actualizing your equity statement and equity goals? And what can we take away from the resources to further our work and develop our DEI lens? So as you all open the interactive slide deck, you'll notice this purpose slide, as well as the directions. So when you get in your group, you'll have an opportunity to spend 10 minutes exploring a resource or resources, and then your group will have an opportunity to discuss the questions on the group slide and to capture notes on your group slide. And then capturing the notes is valuable because we will have an opportunity for you to do a gallery walk of other groups' slides so that you can understand and see what the other groups are saying. And then be ready to share your takeaways because we'll have an opportunity for a group debrief. We want to direct you to slide 4 in the interactive slide deck, where you'll see a link to various resources and then a description of those resources. We know that this is not an exhaustive list of resources. These are just a sampling of resources that we've been exploring and thinking about answering those questions around what is a DEI lens and how might we codify our own DEI lens. So we're going to give you about 30 minutes in these small groups. You're going to have 10 minutes to explore a resource and then the rest of the time to discuss with your group. This is an example of the group slide, and these are the types of questions you'll be able to discuss and explore together. So here in a moment, Laura's going to send you off to your group where you'll have an opportunity to explore your resources and discuss.
All right, I'll open those rooms now. Feel free to join your group, and I'll stay in this main room just in case you're having any technical difficulties. Welcome back, everyone. We'll give just a few more seconds for our rooms to close. All right, welcome back. I think we have all of us back with us. Again, we know that when we close breakout rooms that we have almost guaranteed cut someone or multiple people off in mid-sentence. So we apologize for that, but we appreciate the great discussion. The fact that you all waited for the rooms to close to come back in shows us you were engaged in some good dialogue. So at this time, I will turn it over to my colleagues to walk us through the next step in our journey today.
Okay, so at this point, you've had an opportunity in your small group to discuss the questions, and we now like to do a gallery walk where you are able to review what your colleagues have shared in the other groups. So I'm going to set a timer for 3 minutes, and we'd like to invite you to go back to the interactive slide deck during that time and note what is resonating with you and pushing your thinking in terms of either developing or building upon a DEI lens that you and your organization have. And so again, you'll have about 3 minutes to do so. You're going to go back to the interactive slide deck and review your colleagues' slides. Okay, that was about 3 minutes. So I'd ask that you pause where you are. Of course, you're welcome to review more later if you'd like to, but we'd like to open it up to discussion. So we'd love to hear from you all. We have 3 questions in mind. The first is, what did you notice in the gallery walk? Second, what resonated with you today in our session? And then third, what might your next steps be? So we're going to open the floor and would love to hear from a few of you. What did you notice in the gallery walk? What resonated with you today? And what might your next steps be?
I'm in group 6, and I noticed while looking at some of the other slides, Dr. Velma Cobb brought up in our discussion for our group the fact that, resources are great, but if you don't have the skill to really have difficult conversations and actually address things effectively, then, that's kind of a problem. And I noticed that one of the other groups mentioned something about, I don't know if I can find the exact quote, but something about how, like, when it's hard, people kind of may give up or walk away. And so it was kind of like it seemed like a similarity to me that another group might have been having a similar conversation.
I'd like to ditto that and kind of piggyback here. You started this meeting today saying that it's just as much about the process as the product. And I will know at our university, that's actually been kind of part of the struggle, because as educators, closure or an end product is something that they need to be able to see to envision this journey. And I really think that's kind of part of our process, is this struggle to see what is the purpose and the function that DEI serves within our university. So having those types of discussions are great, but to jump on, and I'm sorry, I lost her name, but to jump on something she just said was, I really think where we are as a university and where a lot of folks appear to be in the gallery walk is that faculty are all at different levels of understanding and competency levels when it comes to this type of work. So I really am looking forward to the opportunity to do more faculty wide, maybe some external folks coming in to support that work, because we are all at totally different levels. I believe her name is Sherry. Thank you, Sherry, for bringing that up.
Thank you, Jordan. I just kind of want to echo too from group 5, some of the same very similar themes as well, of looking at people at different spaces and then having almost like a chart, like a flow chart, that if you're in the beginning stages, these are some activities or these are some engagements that would help move you to the next stage of the continuum, was something that was shared as well as group 5. And then also being able to commit to doing the work and not just walking away from the work, either because of privilege or because of it being difficult work, was another theme that was also elevated as part of our group as well.
This is Ingrid. I was in group 3, and I shared that in the article, More Race Matters, the word all stood out to me for the first time to include races. Whenever I saw the word all, when I talk about students and when I talk about differentiating instruction, it was based on our students with disabilities, our English language learners, or English as a second language, or as another language. Implicitly, I would think of students of color in my being, but explicitly, I did not include that. And so that was an eye-opener for me. And it speaks to the words that I use, right, in the business. So words, and that article also spoke to that, attention to the words and phrases to build assets for our students, all students, including those of color. Thank you.
I was struck by looking at what are we applying a DEI lens to? How deep are we willing to go? Some of the examples in the document I looked at were all at one level on attracting more BIPOC students to the university, on having inclusive art. But what about the mission of the university? What are we preparing students for and to become, and so forth? There were no examples about that. And I think we need, if we have a DEI lens, we need to apply it at the deepest levels, not just at the surface levels.
Sharon, I see you've raised your hand. Go ahead.
Hi, I have a question for Ms. LaCroix, Dr. LaCroix. I know that the rubric, the CSS equity rubric, was your rubric for your school, right?
Yes, that's right.
Cool. I just want to ask you if you could help me in terms of, I'm working on rubrics right now. So I'm like design, so I really was here. And this was so, like literally this morning, I've spent my entire morning on this. So it was really timely. And I'm looking at indicator A, and I'm looking at, is the curriculum challenging, consistently integrates culturally relevant learning? And then I see that you've quantified it after, which I get. but I want to ask you, what was the working definition of challenging?
Yeah, Sharon, I'm so glad you brought this up. You know, when we shared this resource, we decided to share it because it was a sample or an example from a school, so we can see the kind of work that teachers might be engaged in when they're in the schools, and also because this was a culmination, as you can imagine, of a journey. And my understanding is that they're still developing this. So when I looked at it with a rubric lens, exactly to your point, what does that look like? What does challenging look like? And so this rubric was coupled with professional development for staff. We would go into each other's classrooms and we would cohere around what that looks like. We had companion documents that would go with it. So we were looking through a DEI lens with literally everything that we did in classrooms. What are we noticing in hallways? What are we noticing in lunchrooms? And so it is the tip of the iceberg as far as what the rest of the school went through. But I think it speaks to some of the content that we're trying to put our arms around, to name, and to really say, okay, what might this look like? Because if we don't know, it's just words and aspirations. It's just an equity statement that we have. So let's start to cohere around what might this look like.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was standing here, like looking at this and saying, what if, you know, if this is the end, you know, typical backwards design, if this is the end, I'm trying to reach, what components, if I'm creating a rubric that has to do with unit planning, what components do I need at the planning stage when writing, you know, with candidates writing, that will help me, will help at the end get some of what you saw when at the school level, right? Because this is a very beautiful picture of a school level, right? So how do I make sure or ensure that our candidates are thinking, planning, et cetera, so that at the school level, after they teach, that this is what it looks like. So that's why I need to pull those parts out of it. And that's that's the stuff I was grappling with. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. And it's really truly like this rubric it's not the action steps. There are action steps that go with this. So what do teachers need to know and be able to do to engage in the action steps that get us to the outcome of this rubric?
Just to build on what Sharon said, I'm just working with the institution from US Prep, another institution that have a culturally relevant pedagogy included in the rubric for clinical experiences. And what we are discovering that school mentor teachers might have a different vision what is culturally relevant, effective than the faculty. And sometimes it's just a rubric is great, but as you mentioned, those experiences that all the stakeholders have and their norming exercises, or maybe a shared vision of what is behind the words, the meanings actually, and what is identifiable. And sometimes it's not necessarily better what mentor teachers think. It's just maybe not aligned. So alignment of all the members of the community of practice basically is also very important, shared understandings of that.
But again, we have mentioned the role of process in all of this. So having that end in mind, having that design thinking is good, but also the empowerment to be transparent, to show our teacher candidates, you know, you're not going to see perfection out there, but these are some of the steps in order to move the needle, to keep your thinking aligned with the beloved community, the best vision of the way children and participants. But then, you know, you're going to stumble and you're going to find those moments. And here are just some ways to take a breath and realign your thinking and hopefully change in the world.
A lot of us are currently engaged in new CAPE work with the new 2022 standards, and DEI is a huge part of that. And so I know that several of us are working on how do we measure growth, right? How do we see where these candidates are? And what we have had to engage in with teacher candidates is not assuming what we think about them and what their racial identities say about them or what they know about their own self-identities. We have been using Helm's model of racial identity and noticing, that most of them, when they come to us, are definitely at this contact level, this very basic level. And by the end, we hope to get them to some form of racial autonomy. We don't know if that is even a realistic goal at this point, but we did have to see where are our candidates when we do this work, and that contact level is definitely where a lot of them are. So we honestly are not even sure what the end game is because we had no idea where we even were. So we didn't know how to develop that. So we are kind of doing this kind of mixed model approach right now, doing the end and the beginning at the same time to figure out kind of where we are and where we move our teacher candidates forward in the most meaningful ways.
Jordan, that was actually the perfect segue into the next part of our session. This idea of doing multiple things at once, or as we sometimes say, I'm building the plane as you fly it, right? Because there's so much to be done in equity work and in DEI work. And something to consider is how can you address multiple aspects of DEI at one time and make sure you're not missing something along the way, right? So with that in mind, I'm going to invite us back to our PowerPoint presentation and present one last resource for you all. So this resource we will share in the chat in just a moment. It is from an article from ASCD, and it's about equity traps and tropes. And you'll see on the screen 5 of 10 that are listed in the article. And it's really a great way to reflect on where you as an individual are, where your organization is. And in fact, our team, our DEI project management team that Deidre mentioned, we meet weekly. And just last week, we reflected on this particular article and reflected on where do we think we might be falling right now, and how can we ensure that we are not going down a certain path without considering the other aspects of DEI work. So I would invite you to save this link, save the article, and reference it later to continue reflecting and acknowledging where you are and where you'd like to go in this important work. So with that in mind, we will move on to reviewing our purpose for the session. So we had 3 main goals for the session. First was to explore and reflect upon US Prep's DEI journey. Second, engage with a variety of resources to consider ways in which using a DEI lens can help actualize your organization's equity statement. And third, collaborate with others, share experiences and resources, and consider how to apply this learning to your context and goals. Thank you so much for your engagement today. We've enjoyed spending this time with you all, and we hope to see you all soon.